has been accustomed ever since he was a boy to having a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing together inside his head. He doesn't think of doctrines as primarily true or false, but as academic or practical, outworn or contemporary, conventional or ruthless. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. Don't waste time trying to make him think that materialism is true. Make him think that it is strong, or stark, or courageous. That is the philosophy of the future. That is the sort of thing he cares about.
Hello, all you happy people. So, guess what? And I regret to inform you, you are now listening to a podcast that involves me, Sean, and unfortunately, this is where you come in.
Whiskey.
Yes, that's all of it. It features whiskey. Sometimes we talk, sometimes the whiskey talks. Usually it's both. We never know which one's going to be speaking more. At any rate, we are the Soupy Whiskey Brr. And then this is Sean, and I am Tyler, and I'm sorry.
Indeed.
So, we very much droned on our last podcast where we were talking about C.S. Lewis, and we're both happy about it. Neither of us are upset. But going in line with what we've been doing, which is bringing up an author, talking about what makes them important to us, the immediately following podcast has always sort of been, this one's going to be different because in the other ones we've talked about video games that were inspired by these people. And this time we're going a slightly different route. Sean, what are we doing?
We are talking about, some writings by our own C.S. Lewis, specifically, and it may continue on to other things, the Screwtape Letters.
We made this decision very specifically because, let's be brutally honest, every single video game, of which there are a few, that has been inspired by Lewis' works has been, generously they've been terrible.
I remember really enjoying the PS2 Chronicles of Narnia game, but it was so short that it's hardly worth speaking about. You and I, as at 12 and 13 or 14, I guess it was at Christmas, so you were 14. At 12 and 14, I want to say, maybe a little older than that, we beat it in a day.
Yeah, and essentially zero replay value. And I think the reason that we enjoyed it, honestly, was because we finally had a C.S. Lewis game about the Chronicles of Narnia. We were kind of excited. And I think we were only excited about the film because it was a film about the Chronicles of Narnia. And man, in hindsight, when you go back, not good. Like when you take the nostalgia filter off of it, not a fantastic movie. Really not a good game. It's one of those cookie cutter, hey, we released a movie, let's release a game kind of games, which is the opposite of what we it's the exact same thing, but it's the opposite feeling that we had about the Two Towers, Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings sort of games, the Return of the King being the best one for us. Those were phenomenal. These were terrible. We had fun, and then if you go back and look at gameplay and watch people do it, you're like, wow, garbage. So, because of that, big yawn. Because of that, we decided to talk about what I will say is by far the most influential work of C.S. Lewis for me, and probably in your top 3. Which is, if you're not familiar with Lewis, it is the Screwtape Letters. So,
Indeed.
This is one of the most interesting books I've ever read, and hands down one of the most interesting concepts. So you essentially have a book that is fictional, but comprised of a bunch of letters written by, we're just going to say, an elder demon an uncle in this case, so to speak. As far as demon lineages go, I'm not sure if he's actually an uncle, but it's essentially the tutor writing to the pupil of an elder demon to a younger demon, talking about this younger demon's specific task, shall we say, of getting this man's soul. It's very philosophical, technically, and it is one of the most impressive books about the human condition I've ever read.
Absolutely. Before we get too deep into it, I do have a question for you, Tyler.
You already know the answer, ask me anyways.
What are you drinking?
Well, since we definitely did not record this within about a 10-minute span of recording our other one, zero chance that happened, I just decided, well, 1 week later, I went and grabbed the same bottle of Balvenie, which is a 14-year Caribbean cask scotch.
Ah, excellent.
It is a single malt Scotch whiskey and quickly becoming one of my all-time favorites.
Yes, it's one of my favorite scotches myself. One of my other favorite scotches is one that I have that I'm not drinking today, but it is very delicious. It's another Speyside, like what you have. It is Glenfiddich 12. Big fan.
Oh my.
I am drinking hot chocolate.
Oh, beautiful. I am a little envious because, like I said earlier, I've definitely poured myself another glass, and definitely not the original glass that I poured myself 2 hours ago. I'm definitely not still working on that same shot and a half of scotch. Zero chance that happened.
Yeah. There's also 0% chance that I have a tiny bit of Elijah Craig in the bottom of my other glass, and it's a 0% chance that it is the same glass that I poured in last week's
None
episode.
whatsoever. I'm specifically not pouring myself more and keeping myself to this shot and a half because here in a few hours we're actually leaving for the Renaissance Festival, and I'm definitely going to have a glass of mead there, so I have chosen not to overdo it.
I do like the Renaissance Festival mead. Technically, I could go to this Renaissance Festival and yours, because the Oklahoma Renaissance Festival happens in June.
Ah.
And I did not know about it in June.
Technically, you could go to both because they're not on the same one day. There are several days.
That's true. Yeah.
So while you're right, you're also right.
I'm just right.
Well, enough about alcohol. I have chosen not to smoke in this one because, well, frankly, I got very disappointed, last week when my... Sorry, lost my train of thought there.
Yes.
I got very disappointed. I got very disappointed when my tobacco was extremely dry, and also when I inhaled half of it into my lungs. And by the tobacco, I mean the actual chunks of the tobacco, not the smoke. It was terrible. I hated it,
Excellent.
and now I'm sad.
Excellent. I am also not smoking this time, because I don't have a good reason for not smoking, because these are recorded not on the same day. If they were recorded on the same day, it would be because I don't like having two bowls, one right after the other, in such quick succession. But obviously that reason doesn't apply.
No, not in this case. None whatsoever. Well, enough of this vaguely Monty Python banter.
I get it.
Let's talk about this book. So this one actually was inspirational enough for me. I actually wrote my my capstone project for my bachelor's degree because I was a music student. Had to be a piece of music and then a paper written about what I was writing about, and I actually chose to write, if you will, some theme music for this book, and then I wrote a very long paper about a little bit about the Screwtape Letters, but also about the devil in music, because obviously I was writing music, and this is mostly about demons. And why would I say it's entirely about demons?
Almost completely. I remember you doing this project because I made the visuals for it, and other than the intro, the visuals were almost non-existent, and I kind of felt bad for making such poor visuals for your capstone project.
But I will say, going back, it was, granted, we did this the night before it was due, so I'm not like I'm holding it to a high standard, but the cinematography on the one music video we decided to make was bad.
Yeah. It was, we could have done better, and, we made no attempt to clean out the room that we were in. So just like a random like folding table in the corner and just a box and stuff.
I'm 90% sure there were actual clippings of your hair in the floor from my haircut you had had.
Probably. Like, if you don't pay attention to the background at all, you just look at the foreground, it was pretty cool because it was recorded in my house, which was a very old house. The house was built in the 1880s. So it's a very old house, looks like a very old house, has that old-looking architecture and everything. And then walked into the very old-looking room and had a very occult-looking setup on the table. And it was pretty neat. And if you and I had put 45 seconds more effort into making it look good, it would have been awesome.
I'm going to describe it because I don't want people to watch it. We essentially put some filters on a video with terrible lighting, recorded with, did we record that with your handheld camera?
Yeah. I had when I bought it, it was halfway decent. When we recorded it, it wasn't.
We took a handheld Sony.
Yep, little Sony camcorder.
Walked up Sean's stairs into his apartment, opened up the door, kind of did like a slow pan, went into a room where we had set up some, like Sean said, vaguely occultic stuff on the table, along with there's a few pieces of paper. I commissioned a friend of mine to write out on some aged-looking parchment some of the quotes from the Screwtape Letters.
You're remembering wrong. It wasn't aged looking. It was blue.
So it was vaguely aged looking paper, and then it became more aged when Sean and Hannah vaguely destroyed it.
I don't remember that part, but I believe it.
One of you set a cup of coffee on it, and it had a ring on it, and I felt like it was really appropriate, so I wasn't upset at all. It looked great. But yeah. So we recorded. It was terrible, and Sean did the. We had some. We'll just call them visuals because it was just like some quick editing with like a. It wasn't even like, it was kind of like an EQ band, a visual EQ band.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. A vocal effect on the words.
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened with that. You came to me and you said, "Hey, Sean, I want something like this by tomorrow. Is there any way you can do that?" And I said, "Absolutely, I can." You sent me the video files, and then I looked up a tutorial on how to do the thing you asked me to do.
Which is pretty much how both of us do everything. Yeah, they were done. The fun story about this, I actually had the beginning of the day before my project was due. I had my project mostly done, and I sat down and I listened to it, and I went, well, this is garbage. And I deleted the entire thing and wrote something like 20 minutes of music in probably 4 or 5 hours, all while talking to Sean, asking if we could do visuals. Went and recorded the visuals that night of the recorded side. And then I presented it to my professor the following morning in true college fashion. But before we could go off on that tangent, what that was all about was because I've always been very obsessed with the Screwtape Letters. It's phenomenally written. It's very engaging. If you don't have any particular theological beliefs or atheism or whatever, it's still a very good read because it gives us a lot of insight into the way that we think without us really realizing that it's doing it in a way. A lot of it is this elder demon talking to the younger demon and him describing how you would convert this person, so to speak, to steal this person's soul. Here's what you should do, and here's why it works, and here's what they're thinking. And it's rough to read because you're like, wow, I do that.
Yeah, see, here's the thing. If you call yourself a Christian and you read the Screwtape Letters and do not feel conviction, then you have one of two things going on. Either your statement in calling yourself a Christian, you're deceiving yourself, or you're just such a phenomenally fantastic Christian that you're reading it, instead of saying, man, I do that, it becomes, I remember when I used to do that. It's one or the other.
I hold a slightly different opinion than that, because I don't believe there's any individual in the world, period,
Mm-hmm.
who could read this book and not go, "Wow, that's interesting." It's like, wow, I can't believe that that's just such a way to put how I'm screwing up into words. For a Christian, if this book isn't a smack right in your face, I don't know what to tell you, because it just is. If you're just a normal human being walking the street that has no theological beliefs whatsoever, this is still a crazy eye-opening experience into some things that maybe you didn't realize you thought. Maybe you realized some of these things were the way you thought, but you never really could put it into words the way that Lewis managed to. And I've never finished a book and put it down and felt, wow. I've never realized that I was the way that I was more than this book. I don't feel like sometimes you read a book, you go, that was nice, or you read a book and go, well, that was bad. I've never read a book like this one and felt to the extent that this one made me feel of just like, wow, I need to get myself together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
And that was a terrible way of wording that, but it still stands.
Yeah. So I do think that it would. It could stand to reason that that there are such people who could read the Screwtape Letters and not feel convicted on it, and just because such people are actually addressed in the book itself, because he mentions there's a time that Wormwood was unable to tempt the patient because he was surrounded by the asphyxiating cloud that meant that he was close to him, and showing and revealing himself directly for a time. And he said there are some humans are constantly surrounded by this cloud and are therefore inaccessible to us. And I think that's addressing persons like what I said. You just reach the point in your walk with God that you're just like, you've made it.
I think the perfect accompanying quote to this book is not a C.S. Lewis quote, and you'll remember who it is because you're that guy. The perfect accompanying quote to this book, and I hope I don't butcher it because I don't have it in front of me, is, "The greatest lie the devil has ever told humanity is that he doesn't exist."
Mm-hmm. Oh, crap, I forget who that was.
It's a perfect accompanying quote to this book in every single way, and I don't want to dive into why, because I really just want, if anyone's listening to this, please go read this book. It's so good. It's just such a good, deep look into you. And maybe if you're an atheist and you don't believe in the devil and demons, then read it anyways. Read it because it's such a good look into maybe something you're not thinking about, into how you're actually being influenced in your day-to-day life. Your influences that you might think are subconscious are kind of pushed into a different realm when you read this, because they no longer feel self-conscious. You'll never believe that you have any of these thoughts self-consciously again. You'll never think of them as just like something in the back of your brain just kind of push you in this direction, but it's you. You've evolutionarily come to this point in your life, and you think this way now. You'll never look at it that way again. It's pivotal, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that quote is typically attributed to Charles Baudelaire, in approximately 1844.
Mm-hmm.
But it said but John Wilkinson published a version of that quote in 1836, and it's believed that earlier instances exist.
Yeah,
but Christopher McQuarrie's version for that he put into a movie harks back to Baudelaire's statement,
and that's fine. I'm fine with it being anyone. Honestly, it's a very good quote. First of all,
yeah,
it's very, very good. But it's a perfect, again, I already said this, but it's a perfect companion to this book. It's something to keep on a piece of paper off to your right while you're reading it, and look over and glance at it every few minutes after every chapter. Read that quote again and keep reading, and then read the quote again and keep reading. Again, life-changing, pivotal book, and let's talk about it.
Yeah. I'm going to say this too. If you have a desk and on that desk you've decided that you're going to keep an open Bible at all times, and that's your Bible study desk, I would recommend keeping 3 books on that desk with you. Keep them accessible on that desk. And that is the Screwtape Letters, Mere Christianity, and any compilation, any book written by or compilation of essays by G.K. Chesterton.
For sure. And I do kind of want to veer away from the level of theology we're putting into this, not because I don't think it's important. I think it's crucially important. But I think I don't want people to listen to this and think, oh, this is inaccessible to me. I don't have those beliefs. No, this is this is a very important book to every human being in the world. Not because we're Christian and we want you to view a Christian book, or we're saying read this book because be converted or any of that kind of stuff. Yes, but read this book because it is life altering.
Yeah. Now, I'm saying this will release on a Thursday, I believe November 11th. That sounds about right. But this will release on a Thursday. Hey, November 11th, 2001. That's the 10-year anniversary for Skyrim.
Thanks, Skyrim.
Yeah. But this will release on a Thursday at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. And that's important to know because that means that if you're in the United States, this will be early in the morning for you, no matter where you are in the United States. Do not listen to this episode when it comes out, and as soon as it comes out. Wait until around noon or 1 o'clock maybe to listen to this, because the stuff we're talking about in this episode is important. Far too important for a morning. In fact, you better listen to it after lunch.
Which, the best part about this, hilarious, the best part about this is if you've already started listening and it's early, well, too late.
Yeah, oh well.
They got me all joked up.
And if you've not read the Screwtape Letters, that quote that thing I just said sounds really stupid.
Very, very funny, though.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm dying.
But
that was strange.
Indeed. But yeah.
Wow.
So what's the Screwtape Letters? Oh yeah. Oh, never mind. I was gonna ask you what Screwtape Letters was about, but you're still dying. So
I am. I've got a tickle in my throat. I've got a little froggy in my throat. The Screwtape Letters. I vaguely said this a second ago, but the Screwtape Letters is C.S. Lewis writing a work of fiction. It is a collection of letters written from the elder demon, the Uncle Screwtape, as you will, to his protege. Wormwood is the name of his protege, and it is a bunch of individual. I would view this as the same thing that Lewis did in his life, which was write a lot of letters to people of encouragement, help, better understandings of the things that they were concerned with, but on its head. I'm assuming that his correspondence with other individuals was his inspiration to write this in a way, or at least write it in this way. These individual letters contain, shall we say, the demonic methods of taking over someone's soul in a very, very vague way of saying it. It is a very dark book because the implications are pretty aggressive all the way through. In fact, when some fans of the book, not long after its release, begged Lewis to write more. And Lewis eventually did write The Toast later on, and he had mentioned, I believe in an interview letter later, or a letter that he wrote to someone else later, that doing so brought him into a very dark place to go back and revisit Screwtape, to kind of put himself back in that mindset. And I believe that, because reading this puts you in a very strange, dark mental state. It's very taxing, in my opinion, to read, because not only are you thinking about it, not only are you kind of realizing some stuff about yourself while you're reading about it, you're realizing that these things you're realizing about yourself are demonic influences. And that's a hard thing to wrap your head around as a human being. So it's a very deep read. It's not chewy. It's very easy to understand. It's extremely easy to understand. He puts it into a way that, man, it's just it's so crystal clear to you after you read it. That the revelation of reading it, kind of leaves you just. I think I remember the first time I finished it, I just kind of, because it's a short read, you can do it in one setting easily. I remember I was sitting down, I remember putting the book down and just kind of leaning back in my chair, just going like, holy crap. It hits you hard. So read it all at once if you can. Strong recommendation there. If you can't, that's fine. Read a chapter at a time every day. But just be prepared for it to not be a feel-good read, because it isn't.
Absolutely not. But I do like something that was said about it. It was let's see. I have this quote up here. Let me go up to the top of the page here. Another one of the purposes why this book was written, is because of, well, the concept. I don't think it was from this quote from Martin Luther, but the concept of this Martin Luther quote, and I'm going to give the quote from Martin Luther, and you'll understand why it works. Because the work, it's obviously also satirical, like against, like satirizing. It's very true, but also satirical. Like it's kind of playing off the demons as being kind of stupid, and that is intentional. Because I'm going to give some quotes here. One from Martin Luther and one from Thomas More. First is Martin Luther, and that is, "The best way to drive out the devil, if he will not yield to text of Scripture, is to jeer and flout him, for he cannot bear scorn." And then from Thomas More, "The devil, the proud spirit, cannot endure to be mocked." And that's also kind of what this is. It's also like it's explaining, giving a good explanation of how temptation will work in your life and how to avoid being tempted in those cases. But also, it's making a mockery of the tempters. Saying, look, they're trying so hard and they're doing this. But the whole thing, like, the tempters are making a mockery of themselves even. There are many times when it's like, man, we wish we were able to do this, but the enemy, and God is the enemy in the context of the book, just has such an advantage in this, and he does this, and I can't believe he's this way. And, like, they're not only are they being mocked by the, like, in a satirical way, but they're also, in a way, mocking themselves. Because, like, they're kind of admitting without admitting that they're on the losing side, and that's kind of half of the point of it too.
There's the I made a joke about being Monty Python. So there is that very British sense of humor all through this. And that's sort of the satire. How am I trying to word this? I kind of, after you read the first time and it kind of, you let it hit you and you get to read it again, you can kind of pick up on more of the nuances. And part of it's really amusing. If you read this book, we never think of, no matter who you are as a person, you think of demons as being these, these big, bad looking evil entities that are, out to kill you, out to destroy you, out to steal your soul, all this kind of stuff. But this book definitely puts, it's almost like Screwtape is this guy behind a desk wearing a tie, and business formal clothing, and being a consultant, and it's interesting, because like I said, that's the satire there too, is it paints this very interesting picture of what a demon would be or what a demon would do and how they would instruct it. Because you don't think about there being like, there's this demon like writing to his uncle being like, hey, I can't get this guy to fall. Like, do you have any suggestions? He's like, oh, yes, you should do this thing. It's comical in its own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I just discovered something, and I can get it for free on Kindle because the paid Kindle thing that I'm doing. And I kind of like it. I like the idea of it, but it's probably going to be poorly written, and I'm going to look at it and see if it is poorly written sometime soon. But it is the name of it, and it's not written by C.S. Lewis. It's written by, I forget the author now. I've never heard of him before. But the name of it is The Michael Letters, Heaven's Answer to Screwtape.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it seems like it could be interesting. I'm going to check it out. But yeah,
Like right now.
Yeah. Also, I'm going to ask you to continue on with a thought because normally what I would say would be an answer to your thought, but I realized that I was looking at my phone, looking at the Michael Letters while you were saying the last thing you were saying, and I realized that I wasn't paying attention to you in the slightest bit. So I can't answer you when I don't know what you said.
I was just kind of diving off the deep end a little bit about the satirical side. And honestly, we should probably move on from the satirical side, if I'm being honest, because not that that's not good. It's great. But that's not the meat and potatoes of this book.
Yeah.
And I
that
don't
is
know.
true.
We never talk. We try not to talk in detail about what we're going to talk about for this reason, and I like that. But I mean, we could probably go over some favorite quotes of this, and kind of like talk about the implications of those quotes, because obviously we've already summed up the book. So for someone who hasn't read the book, you already understand it enough to know what it is. The importance of this book. You could really get the entire gist of this book and the importance of this book looking at the top 20 quotes from it. I don't advise doing that. I advise reading it. But you could really get the importance from reading just the top 20 quotes from the Screwtape Letters, and they're absolutely doozies. I was going to read a few of them, and we can talk about them individually. I don't know if I'm sure you have a few that you like as well. But my favorite, as far as short ones, my favorite one is the long one that I mentioned in the last episode. But my favorite short one is the one that really goes along with the quote that I said you should be keeping by you while you're doing this. It is funny how mortals always picture us as putting things into their minds. In reality, our best work is done by keeping things out. And that is a hand-in-hand quote of the biggest lie the devil's ever told us that doesn't exist. It has such deep and incredibly heavy implications by that quote, because it's not a simple quote. It looks simple on the surface and it's short on the surface, but oh my goodness, that's so deep. If you think about the idea, and you have to read the rest of the book to really get this, but the entire concept of what Screwtape is instructing Wormwood to do is this extremely simplified, undercomplicated way of thinking and mindset to push in this individual. And this really sums it up for me. It's as simple as not overcomplicating things, not filling it full of doubt, not filling it full of this thing, just we don't think about this thing. No, we don't think about this thing. Oh, that thing's unimportant. And the number of things that could apply to are astronomical.
Yeah, and I also like that it's kind of, it's not stated in the letters. Actually, the literal opposite is stated in the letters, but it's implied by the reader must infer from the letters that Wormwood's failure to secure the patient is actually not based on Wormwood's incompetence. Because at every step of the way, you see that, there was something that God said that threw off Wormwood's plan. There was a good Christian influence, and now Wormwood is unable to do what he wanted to do. Everything, obviously, Screwtape is framing it as Wormwood, you incompetent fool.
Yeah,
but,
a lot.
Yeah, but it's very much not that, and that's what I love about that, because whatever whether the fiction of the Screwtape Letters is correct, in that you have a demon assigned to you, which I'm gonna say not every person can have their own individual demon, if I'm correct about the numbers. Because if you look at the number of angels that's mentioned in Revelation, you see 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands, referring to the number of angels. And that is the number of angels remaining. And that would be 100 some odd million angels. And if Lucifer took the third part of the angels with him, therefore the amount of angels remaining is equal to double the number of demons that Lucifer has under his control. We now know that there's approximately 50 million demons, if those numbers are the numbers that are referring to what I think they're referring to. And with 7 billion people in the world, 50 million demons is not enough to give everybody one demon.
No, not really. No. And hilarious math there. That's another thing. You brought up the Wormwood, you incompetent fool. It's really funny to me because, again, like I said, like you get this feeling of a demon behind a desk writing these. As someone who spent all of their real career in corporate America, it's really funny because it feels just like that. Like there's this wave of unstoppable stuff that's happening that you're supposed to be doing stuff against, and they're like, why aren't you fixing it? It feels a lot like that. It makes it feel like hell is a business, and that's always been very funny to me.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna I have to read this quote. Something that was said earlier made me think of it. I'm gonna read it. And it's probably completely off topic now. It's definitely not off topic because it's a quote straight from the Screwtape Letters, but it's a delightfully fun quote. This just shows. This just shows. Like, you know, going into Wormwood's failure, as a demon, and then what happens after that. The intro that we did before the music in last week's episode, that was the intro to, that was the introduction to the 31st letter, of the Screwtape Letters, and this quote is from the 31st letter also, but it's really good, and that is, that is this, it's, going into Wormwood's failures, is that, the more one thinks about it, the worse it becomes. He got through so easily. No gradual misgivings, no doctor's sentence, no nursing home, no operating theater, no false hopes of life, sheer instantaneous liberation. One moment it seemed to be all our world, the scream of bombs, the fall of houses, the stink and taste of high explosive on the lips and in the lungs, the feet burning with weariness, the heart cold with horrors, the brain reeling, the legs aching. Next moment all this was gone like a bad dream, never again to be of any count. Defeated, outmaneuvered fool. Did you mark how naturally, as if he'd been born for it, the earth-born vermin entered the new life? How all his doubts became, in the twinkling of an eye, ridiculous. I know what the creature was saying to itself. Yes, of course. It always was like this. All horrors have followed the same course, getting worse and worse and forcing you into a kind of bottleneck, till, at the very moment when you thought you must be crushed, behold, you were out of the narrows and all was suddenly well. The extraction hurt more and more, and then the tooth was out. The dream became a nightmare, and then you woke. You die, and then you are beyond death. How could I have ever doubted it?
Yeah,
and that, I don't remember what else made me think of that, but like, it's beautiful. Like, it's, you know, so yeah, Wormwood fails in the end. The subject of the recipient of the letters that Screwtape is writing. He fails in the end. He's supposed to keep his patient alive until they can remove him from Christianity. And he's killed by a bomb. Which makes me think, since everything I said... yeah, exactly. But everything I said... yeah, like, or not everything I said, but one of the things that I said previously was that all the stuff that's happening to the patient is like, you know, there's just random divine intervention, random divine intervention, or a good influence on his life, or, you know, something like that. And I'm very curious. I wonder if the inference that a person might take from this letter is that Wormwood may have been may have soon been successful if he wasn't making progress. And the death, the bombs that killed the patient were a mercy, like sent by God. You know, because I'm sure God's done that before. Like, I don't want you to make this decision, and I think you're going to make this decision. So instead of you making this decision that's going to drag you away from me that I don't want, I will instead allow you to be. There are people that are going to die today, and I will allow you to be among them, to prevent you from making the decision that will ruin your life.
It's a very deep subject for a fictional character.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting point. Probably.
Mm-hmm. It's probably an interesting point. Or
it would be a very British piece of humor, if you think about it that way, of having an entire book of all the ways this demon is building up to this big climax, and the big climax is no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just no. The answer is no. I mean, that's again very British humor. So yeah, I think it's more poetic that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's again funny, really really funny, to think about that as a concept. Not nearly as funny as the implication that Screwtape is going to eat wormwood, because that's kind of heavily inferred.
Yeah, absolutely. At the very end there, which the quote that implies that he's going to eat him at one point, or at least somehow ingest him, that was the introduction quote last week. But then at the end of that letter, most truly do I sign myself, your increasingly and ravenously affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Yeah, there at the end, it's
Mm-hmm. Or I guess I guess that's in a previous letter that is a statement that it absolutely says that the justice of hell is more practical. Bring us food or be food yourself.
Literal in this case.
Yeah. Beautiful. But yeah. So obviously there's more. I mean, yeah. Do you want to go into more detail of the things that happen within the Screwtape letters, or
I'm thinking about that while I'm looking at quotes? Yeah.
Yes, I don't know, if we're wanting to go into detail, follow the life of the patient, go into detail, talking about how the methods they're talking about, or if we should just say, listen, that's kind of how the Screwtape Letters pans out. What we just said. Now go read it for yourself. You need to read it. And then, for the last couple minutes, that we have, move on to, a different, move on to, Mere Christianity and talk about the concepts within that.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk more about the Screwtape Letters. I mean, I'd love to, but I'd love to talk about it all day long. But I really just want people to read it. It's such a good book, and I don't want to give more of it away. It's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. But it's let's see, let me find this. But yeah, Mere Christianity, then we'll move on to that. It's obviously, most of Mere Christianity, having been cemented in my beliefs before I ever read the book. It was much more about for me, it was much more hearing someone incredibly intelligent cementing what I said. Or cementing what I knew to be the case. And Yeah, what I knew to be the case. So like it wasn't so much I uh yeah, it wasn't so much that I read it and I discovered new doctrine from it, but I but I you know, like there are a few things that I didn't quite know how to explain, but and then once I read this I figured out, hey, that's a fantastic explanation for it. And it's so like I don't know, it's like it's so, like it's a good read. Like if you want to understand what the concept of Christianity is, you don't know, then read Mere Christianity. If you are a Christian and want something that's going to submit your doctrine, then
Also read it.
yeah, also read it. It's it's fantastic.
I feel like a lot of people that are Protestants, especially in the more aggressive sects, shall we say,
Sects.
sects, do find this book to be rather soft, because I believe I'm true in saying this. A lot of people who are in the same belief system that you and I were raised in don't like philosophical approaches to the Bible. They only like very, very literal statements. They don't like these more broad sweeping statements that help you think about it and help you understand it through your own self. That's what philosophy is. Philosophy is giving you a lens through which to view what you are already viewing in a way that allows you to figure it out for yourself. And I'm not trying to call them simpletons by any means, but they don't like to deal in these methods. And because of that, they've kind of viewed Lewis's stuff as not being doctrinal, I should say, like we always have. They don't like the idea of him not coming out and preaching a sermon, in a way. So while there are some people who absolutely love it and think it's phenomenal, the more, I don't want to say more educated, but more educated people who we've heard teach will latch onto it, and the less will kind of dismiss it because they don't like to speak in broad terms, so to speak. We did this longer than I thought we would already, longer than we normally do. Sorry. Go back on topic. So it's been a long time since I've read Mere Christianity.
Yeah.
And I don't have some of the nuances that you do now. You've read it more recently than me, and you have a better memory than me. But a quote that I think is fantastic, that I had forgotten the exact wording of, although I've always remembered the concept, was, "It is better to forget about yourself altogether." Now, that's obviously the end of a lengthier passage that is extremely helpful and extremely useful and extremely great. But that one line is, I think it's one of the more difficult things to process as a human. And it's one of the most philosophical things he said in the entire book, even though it's a very simple sentence. But I find it to be one of the most useful things he said once you can wrap your mind around it.
Yes.
Sounds like yes. I agree with that. I cannot disagree with the statement because I'm typing.
Okay. So yeah, I didn't catch the quote that you were giving. I thought you said there was a quote you had in mind, and I didn't catch it. Let's say it again. Yeah, and then I'll agree with it.
It is better to forget about yourself altogether.
Yes. I absolutely agree with that. Okay. Yes.
Thank you for agreeing with me.
Okay, so this is something my one of my single favorite quotes from Mere Christianity. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time from anything. It's a single paragraph, and it was this. He told people that their sins were forgiven and never waited to consult all the other people whom their sins had undoubtedly injured. He unhesitatingly behaved as if he was the party chiefly concerned, the person chiefly offended in all offenses. This makes sense only if he really was the God whose laws are broken and whose love is wounded in every sin. In the mouth of any speaker who is not God, these words would imply what I can only regard as a silliness and conceit unrivaled by any other character in history.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Genuinely fantastic quote, because I think that especially all of it, because he's making a slightly different point than I am, but that thought process gives you a completely different lens to view, well, really the whole Bible, but honestly a big chunk of the Old Testament, because obviously we deal with the law and the sterner stuff in some of the, our first 5 books of the Bible, but I feel like we view it as stern more often than not, because we view rules as being stern and laws as being stern. But that quote really puts it into a completely different perspective of the point is a weird thing to say, but the point God is coming from. I think it makes you view all of that portion of the Bible completely differently, in my opinion, and it makes it a very powerful quote.
Yep, absolutely.
Are we the only people to be talking this in depth about theology while drinking alcohol?
Well, given like 60 years ago, we wouldn't have been.
True.
Today, because of how everything has gone and changed and whatever, there won't be very many. And the ones besides us that do, I don't know that I would trust their theology.
That's a resounding point.
Yeah. Like it's just because like I have like, a very biblical opinion of alcohol, and very, very extremely few people claim to have the opinion that I do. And of those extremely few people who claim to have the opinion that I do, it's an even fewer number that actually do.
Yeah. For sure.
So,
was there anything else you wanted to mention from this particular thing? Because I really love leaving both of these books a little bit blank, because I really want people to read them. I don't want to give away too much of the plot, as it were.
Yeah, well, I was trying to find one thing. If I'm talking about Mere Christianity, there's one thing that I really wanted to talk about, because we have someone who's very close to us here, who absolutely will not be listening to this, but that has absolutely zero idea of how the Trinity works. And it's such a fantastic quote. And I'm going to butcher it if I just try to just say it. So I have to find it. But it's basically I'm going to take one really thing real fast. It's it's like explaining how like how the three persons of the Godhead would work, and I never heard someone describe it that way, and it really works really well. Like the first thing is like it went into the Father and the Son, and it like it mentions, the Son being, or Christ being referred to as the Word in John 1. And that was how they went in on there. Here we go. Here it is. I said a few pages back that God is a being which contains 3 persons while remaining one being, just as a cube contains 6 squares while remaining one body. But as soon as I begin trying to explain how these persons are connected, I have to use words which make it sound as if one of them was there before the others. The first person is called the Father, and the second the Son. We say that the first begets or produces the second. We call it begetting, not making, because what he produces is of the same kind as himself. In that way, the word Father is the only word to use, but unfortunately it suggests that he is there first, just as a human father exists before his son. But that is not so. There is no before and after about it, and that is why I have spent some time trying to make clear how one thing can be the source or cause or origin of another without being there before it. The Son exists because the Father exists, but there never was a tune before the Father produced the Son.
Which is fantastic.
I assume that this is a typo in this edition. It's supposed to be a time. There never was a time before the Father. So that is, the Father and the Son are constantly thing. So like the Son. Here we go. In the same way, we must think of the Son always, so to speak, streaming forth from the Father, like a light from a lamp, or heat from a fire, or thoughts from a mind. He is the self-expression of the Father. What the Father has to say is, so in John 1 it's referred to the Son as the Word. And there never was a time when he was not saying it. But have you noticed what is happening? All these pictures of light or heat are making it sound as if the Father and Son were 2 things instead of 2 persons. After all, the New Testament picture of a Father and Son turns out to be much more accurate than anything we try to substitute for it. That is what always happens when you go away from the words of the Bible. It is quite right to go away from them for a moment in order to make some special point clear, but you must always go back. Naturally, God knows how to describe himself much better than we know how to describe him.
Which is fantastic, by the way. That's such a jovial
Mm-hmm.
poke at the entire concept of the red-faced, sweaty brow preacher concept of how they describe this. It's just funny to read.
Yeah, and the reason why, the description of the Trinity in this is so important to me, and the way that my church teaches the Trinity, which is effectively the same way, not slightly different wording, but the same way, and it's the way that
less intelligent. Let's be honest.
Yeah, very much less intelligent. My pastor is an intelligent man, but he's not C.S. Lewis.
No, he's not. I can confirm this.
Absolutely,
he's dead.
Yeah, and actually, my pastor he's not a very young man, but he is young enough that he did die before, or he was born, but after C.S. Lewis died. But he but yeah, and I there's someone who's very close to us that subscribes to the teachings of Arius, which is debunking and debunking the teachings of Arius were the entire reason for the entire reason for the Council of Nicaea. Back in, when was that, 300 something AD?
A while ago.
Yeah, that was the entire reason for that council, was for Arius to come and tell his side and then have everybody else debunk him. But his teachings was that if there is a father and a son, by nature of being father and son, the son must somehow be lesser than the father. And right. I have someone very close to me who does believe that way, and it's very unfortunate. Which, by the way, Nicholas, Nicholas, the person after whom Saint Nicholas, Santa Claus, is named. When Arius stood up and told his opinion of that, Nicholas got up from his seat, crossed the room, and slapped him in the face.
Which is the appropriate response.
Absolutely. But it was great. But yeah.
I know, I was there.
Fantastic.
I was the chair, I clapped.
But there's a legend there, and a portion of it is true. But and I don't know how much of it is true and how much of it is not true. I hope the whole thing's true because it's wonderful. But So this was before the received text were written. The received text were written, I think, like in the 1400s. But there was a Latin version pre-received texts that they had for the scripture at that time. And it's important to know that they did have written scripture, written compiled scripture at that time, even though it was before the received. The Textus Receptus was written, and they but it was. I can't think of who it was, but the Roman emperor at the time, he had a law that no violence could be done in his presence, and so they were going to throw Nicholas in prison for slapping Arius, and he said, and the emperor basically said, "Hey, I'm only here on a technicality. This is a church issue. Church handle it." And so they wanted to put Nicholas in jail until the council had dismissed, and then they were going to figure out what to do with him after that. And they said that during the night while he was in jail, so they stripped him of his cardinal robes, so he's no longer a cardinal because they took his robes off, and they said and that they threw him in jail. And it was said that while he was in his cell, Christ came to him and said, "Nicholas, why did you slap that man?" And he said, "I was defending you, Lord." And the response from Jesus was something to the effect of, "I appreciate the sentiment, but if you think that you need to slap people to defend me, then you don't quite understand what I want. And so to understand what I want better, here, read this," and handed him a copy of the compiled scriptures that they had. And while he was reading it, Christ put his cardinal robes back on him. And when they came in to check on him the next morning, he had the scripture and was reading it and was wearing his cardinal robes. And they went and told the emperor, and he said, "We'll take him out of jail this instant. Bring him back in here."
Solid chance that very well could be. It's very fantastic. That's a hilarious story. In that case, bring him here at once.
Yeah. But yeah, it was pretty good. But yeah,
have we managed to get off on a tangent on this one? We've done it again.
Yeah, we have. Well, I said last week it was going to happen. I think that if we stayed on topic on any of our topics, it wouldn't be Super Whiskey Bros.
This is true. This is not untrue. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'd really like to end it there.
Yeah.
I don't want to go any deeper. I want people to read these books. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Read it. The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Go read it. If I were to suggest an order to read them in, read the Screwtape Letters first. Not for any other reason than you're much more likely, the average listener is much more likely to read that book first because it's not quite so blatantly theological. And then after you read that, at least consider reading Mere Christianity. It's fantastic.
And Mere Christianity is referenced in the Screwtape Letters.
It is. Because it was written, drumroll, after the Screwtape Letters.
Hey!
Wait a minute. That's not right. Time travel.
The other way around.
Anyways.
Yes. Well, I think the best way to end this is with a quote from St. Francis of Assisi.
Do it.
The quote is, "Witness at all times. Use words if necessary."
Fantastic. And to quote
Anyways.
Tombstone, well, bye.